The phrase he used was streamlining our operational footprint. It sounded important, decisive, the kind of thing a man in a $4,000 Brioni suit says when he's about to ruin someone's life. My name is Donald Patterson. I'm 58 years old. For 32 of those years, I managed the Sterling West Financial Campus. I wasn't just the facilities manager. I was the institutional memory, the human schematic for 300,000 square feet of steel, glass, and copper wire. The man across the polished mahogany table was Bryce Thompson. He was 35, maybe, with a Wharton MBA and the soft, uncalloused hands of someone who's never had to fix anything more complicated than a bad Wi-Fi connection. He had been CEO for 6 months. Don, he began, and the casual shortening of my name was the first small twist of the knife. We're moving toward a more agile, asset-light model. As part of that cultural reform, we've decided to outsource all facilities management to a national partner. I said nothing. I watched the HR director, a woman named Sarah, refuse to meet my eyes. She was studying a microscopic speck of dust on the table as if it held the secrets to the universe. Your position, Bryce continued, leaning back with an air of finality, has become redundant. Redundant. For 32 years, I had been essential. I was the 2 a.m. phone call for a burst pipe in the server room. I was the guy who knew the precise sequence to reset the main HVAC chiller that wasn't in any manual. I was the one who personally negotiated the service contracts that saved this company hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Now, I was redundant. We appreciate your long service, of course, Bryce added, a meaningless platitude. HR will walk you through the severance package. It's standard. He gestured vaguely at Sarah. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, but my face remained a mask of calm. I learned that in the Army, a lifetime ago. Never let them see the blast. Just the crater. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal effects, he finished. We need your keys and access cards before you leave the premises. He thought it was the end of the story, a neat, tidy optimization. He probably had a LinkedIn post drafted already. Leadership. Tough decisions. Future-focused. He was wrong. He had no idea that the premises he was so eager to have me vacate were, in a very real sense, mine. If you enjoy stories about arrogant suits learning hard lessons about what real assets are and how quiet competence always beats loud ambition, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell. I've got a lot of stories about corporate karma, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. 2 days before the humiliation, I was on my hands and knees in the sub-basement of Building 1, tracing a coolant leak in a 40-year-old pipe. The new outsourced team, Synergy Serve, had been on site for a week, shadowing me. Their lead technician, a kid half my age with an iPad and a pristine uniform, had diagnosed the problem as a faulty pressure sensor. He was wrong. It was a hairline fracture in a weld near the main junction, a weak point I'd been documenting for 5 years, begging for the budget to replace. That was my life at Sterling West. Knowing things nobody else did. Fixing things nobody else could. I started in 1992. The company was just Sterling and West then, a small regional investment firm housed in a single, handsome Art Deco building. Old man Sterling himself hired me. He was a tough, no-nonsense man who'd built the company from nothing. He'd shake my hand, his grip like a vice, and ask about my family. He understood that the building was a machine, and I was its chief engineer. Over the next 3 decades, I oversaw its transformation. We added Building 2 in 1998, a sleek glass tower for the traders. Building 3, the Data and Operations Center, went up in 2005. I managed the construction bids, supervised the contractors, and memorized the blueprints until I could walk through the walls in my sleep. I knew the gauge of every wire, the capacity of every circuit breaker, the location of every hidden shutoff valve. This knowledge wasn't academic. In the summer of 2008, a flash flood overwhelmed the city's storm drains. Water poured into our basement, the server room with millions of dollars of hardware and the company's entire financial records was in danger. While everyone else was panicking, I was wading through waist-deep water with two of my guys, building a barricade of sandbags and running sump pumps on power from a portable generator I kept fueled for just such an occasion. We saved the servers. The company lost maybe an hour of uptime. The CEO at the time gave me a $1,000 bonus and a plaque. I missed my son Mark's 10th birthday party that weekend because I was drying out electrical conduits. That was the job. My wife, Clara, used to joke that I was married to the campus. She passed away 7 years ago. After that, the work was what I had left. It was familiar. It was solid. I took my modest salary, just over $92,000 a year by the end, and I invested it. I lived simply. My house was paid off. My 1985 Ford F-150, which I'd maintained myself, still ran like a top. I didn't need much. I was saving for my son and for his daughter, my granddaughter, Emily. My pension was supposed to be the capstone on that, a secure, quiet retirement. Bryce Thompson had just turned it all to dust, but he didn't know about the secret. He didn't know about Old Man Sterling and a conversation we had back in 1999. Back then, the dot-com bust had hit the firm hard. Sterling and West, now Sterling West Financial after a merger, was bleeding cash. The board, a new group of sharp-edged financiers, was pressuring Sterling to liquidate assets. He called me into his office one evening. It was late. The building was quiet. He poured 2 glasses of scotch. He looked tired, older than his years. "Donnie," he said, swirling the amber liquid, "this place is changing. The money men are in charge now. They don't see people. They see numbers on a spreadsheet. They don't build things. They just buy and sell." He pushed a thick, leather-bound document across his desk. "You know this building, the original one, was built in 1925. I nodded. The cornerstone by the main entrance said so. It was built on a 99-year land lease, a common practice back then. The company owns the building, but not the ground beneath it. The lease expires on November 15th, 2024. He took a long sip of his scotch. "To raise capital, the board is forcing me to sell off what they call non-performing assets. One of them is the land under our feet. They're selling our landlord position to some faceless RET in Delaware for a pittance. They think the building is a teardown, that the land is worthless. They're wrong. I've seen the city's master plan. They're going to rezone this entire district for high-density commercial use. In 20 years, this plot of land will be one of the most valuable in the city." He looked me straight in the eye. His gaze was intense. "You've given your life to this place, Donnie. More than my own son has. These new people, they will not be loyal to you. The day will come when they look at your salary as a line item to be cut. You need to protect yourself. You need to own something they can't take away." I was just a facilities manager. I was 33 years old. I didn't know anything about buying commercial real estate. "How?" I asked. "The REIT is buying it for $450,000, he said. "I happen to know their financing is shaky. I can make a call, introduce some uncertainty, give you a window. You have savings. You have integrity. Find a way." He slid a business card across the desk. "This is my personal attorney. Tell him I sent you. Set up a holding company, an LLC, something anonymous. Make an offer. I'll make sure it's accepted." It was the biggest risk of my life. I had about $80,000 in savings. My parents had passed away the year before and left me another $150,000. It was everything I had in the world. I met with the attorney, a shrewd old man named Miller, who seemed to understand the situation instantly. We created Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC. We scraped together the financing, getting a loan for the rest. We made the offer, $465,000. As Sterling predicted, the R. Yates deal fell through. Ours was accepted. On February 3rd, 2000, I, through a legal entity that had no official connection to me, became the owner of the 1.5-acre parcel of land at 400 Commerce Street. I became Sterling West Financial's landlord. For the next 24 years, the company paid their modest lease fee, just $12,000 a year, as stipulated in the 1925 agreement, to a P.O. box managed by Miller's law firm. The money went into a bank account for Oak Ridge Holdings. I never touched it. I just let it grow, a silent river of wealth flowing beneath the foundations of my life. Bryce Thompson, with his Wharton MBA and his talk of operational footprints, saw a 58-year-old man in a worn work shirt who was past his prime, an expense to be cut. He never bothered to look deeper. He never asked who owned the ground his shiny glass tower was built on. Arrogance is a blindness of its own making. The day I was fired, I didn't go straight home. I drove to the county records office. I didn't need to, but I wanted to see it. I wanted to hold the paper. The clerk, a young woman with purple hair, looked at me strangely as I requested the deed for Lot 7, Block 14, Commerce Street. She brought out the folio. There it was, a transfer of title dated February 3rd, 2000, from Sterling and West Properties, Inc. to Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC. My hands were steady as I traced the signature line. Then I went home. I opened the old steel safe in my study. I pulled out the original 1925 lease agreement. It was brittle, the paper yellowed with age, but the language was clear as day. A term of 99 years, expiring at 11:59 p.m. on November 15th, 2024. There was no automatic renewal clause, no option to extend. In 1925, they couldn't imagine a world a century away. My next call was to David Miller, the son of Sterling's old attorney. He'd taken over the practice and the management of Oak Ridge Holdings when his father retired. "David," I said, my voice even, "it's Don Patterson." "Don, how are you? I was fired today." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. "They finally did it. The fools." "The lease expires in 3 weeks, David. November 15th. "I know," he said. His voice was no longer friendly. It was sharp, professional. "I was waiting for your call. What do you want to do?" "Send the notice of non-renewal," I said. "Certified mail. Signature required. Send it to the CEO's office. Bryce Thompson." "Consider it done," David replied. "They'll have to respond within 10 business days to even open negotiations." But I knew Bryce. He didn't deal with mail. He dealt with dashboards and PowerPoints. He had an executive assistant for things like certified letters. He would see a letter from a holding company he'd never heard of and assume it was junk. And that's exactly what happened. David confirmed it a week later. The letter was delivered on November 1st. It was signed for by a Chloe Jensen, Bryce's assistant. The 10-day window to respond opened. Tick, tock. Meanwhile, chaos was quietly descending upon the Sterling West campus. Bryce's brilliant move to outsource facilities to SynergyServe was backfiring spectacularly. The company was a national chain that promised synergistic cost savings through standardized operational protocols. In reality, they were a low-bid disaster. Their technicians were trained to follow a flowchart on an iPad. They had no understanding of the campus's unique history or its countless quirks. The first sign of trouble was the HVAC system. I had always run a delicate balance, manually adjusting dampers and flow rates based on the season, the time of day, and even the position of the sun. SynergyServe's system was all automated. Within a week, the traders in Building 2 were complaining it was an icebox, while the accountants in Building 1 were sweating through their shirts. Productivity dipped. Complaints flooded the new facility's hotline, which routed to a call center in another state. Then a water main burst in the East Wing. It was a Friday afternoon. The Synergy Serve tech on duty couldn't find the local shutoff valve. The master valve for the whole building was in a locked sub-basement room, and he didn't have the key. Water poured for 2 hours, causing over $200,000 in damage to a newly renovated office suite before they could get a plumber to cut the pipe. I knew that valve was located behind a false panel in the janitor's closet on the first floor. It wasn't on any blueprint. It was just something you knew if you'd been there long enough. I heard about it from one of my old crew, a good man named George, whom Synergy Serve had kept on at a lower wage. He called me, his voice full of frustration. "It's a madhouse, Don," he said. "These guys don't know anything. They're just walking around with their tablets looking lost. Bryce is screaming at everyone." I just listened. Let the system fail. Let them see what they had thrown away. My value wasn't on my resume. It was in the silent, smooth functioning of a complex machine. Now that I was gone, the machine was starting to grind its gears. The breaking point came in early November, a week before the lease was set to expire. Bryce, ever the showman, had planned a massive Sterling West reimagined gala for the evening of November 16th. It was to be a celebration of his new vision, with clients, investors, and city officials in attendance. He was spending a fortune on it: caterers, lighting designers, a live band. On the morning of November 8th, a primary power conduit in the main building's electrical room shorted out. It was an old piece of hardware, one I had flagged for replacement 3 years in a row. The budget was never approved. The short circuit caused a cascade failure. The lights flickered and died. The entire building went dark. The emergency backup generator should have kicked on within seconds, but it didn't. A critical transfer relay had failed. It was a simple, inexpensive part, but it needed to be manually inspected every 6 months. That was one of my tasks. It wasn't on Synergy Serve's standardized checklist. Building 1 was dead in the water. No lights, no computers, no phones, and the gala was just over a week away. Bryce was apoplectic. George told me he was storming through the dark hallways with his phone's flashlight, yelling about incompetence and threatening lawsuits. He couldn't comprehend a problem that couldn't be fixed with a reboot. The clock was ticking. November 10th. November 12th. The deadline for responding to the lease, non-renewal notice, passed in complete silence. They hadn't even opened the letter. On the morning of November 16th, the day after the lease expired, David Miller called me. "It's done," he said. "They are officially in breach. They are trespassing." That same morning, Bryce had called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. The gala was a catastrophic failure before it even began. The power was still out. He was in full damage control mode, trying to blame Synergy Serve, the city power grid, anyone but himself. The meeting was held in the conference room of Building 2, which still had power. I knew that room. I had chosen the carpet myself. At 10:15 a.m. sharp, I walked into the Sterling West campus for the first time since I'd been fired. I wasn't wearing my old work shirt. I was wearing a simple, dark gray suit I'd bought for my wife's funeral. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I owned. David Miller was by my side, carrying a thin leather briefcase. We walked past the security desk. The guard, a young man who had always been polite to me, just stared, unsure what to do. We didn't need access cards. We walked straight to the executive suite on the top floor. Bryce was in the middle of a presentation, a slide with the word resilience in huge letters projected behind him. He was sweating, his voice strained as he tried to project an aura of control. "So, while this is a temporary setback, it's also an opportunity to prove our agility." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. His face went through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, then irritation, then pure rage. "Patterson," he snarled. "What in the hell are you doing here? Get him out of here. Security!" 2 board members, older men who had been there for years, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Bryce's own father, a titan of industry who sat on the board, looked on with a stony expression. David Miller stepped forward and placed a hand on my arm, a gesture both calming and commanding. "I would advise against that, Mr. Thompson," David said, his voice cutting through the tension. "My client is here at the express invitation of this board's legal counsel, and as the owner of the land on which Building 1 currently sits." He opened his briefcase and, with methodical precision, began placing a bound document in front of each board member. A copy of the deed, a copy of the 1925 lease, a copy of the certified mail receipt for the notice of non-renewal, signed by Chloe Jensen. A profound silence fell over the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the HVAC system, AE8 system I had designed. Bryce's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked at the documents, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. This is a mistake," he stammered. "A joke." I spoke for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "There's no mistake, Bryce." I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member. The 99-year lease on the land under Building 1 expired at 11:59 p.m. last night. A legally required notice of non-renewal was delivered to your office on November 1st, and subsequently ignored. As of this morning, Sterling West Financial is illegally occupying my property. I let that hang in the air. "The power outage," I continued, "is frankly the least of your concerns. According to the terms of the original lease, any structures remaining on the property after expiration become the property of the landowner. That means I own your headquarters." I paused. "You have 72 hours to vacate the other two buildings. After that, I will begin eviction proceedings." Bryce finally found his voice, a high-pitched squeak of disbelief. "You can't. I'm the CEO." His father, Arthur Thompson, finally spoke. His voice was gravelly, filled with cold fury. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his son. "You're an idiot." The company's lead counsel, a man I'd dealt with for years on permits and zoning, cleared his throat. He had been reading the documents David provided, his face growing paler with every page. "He's right, Arthur," the lawyer said quietly. "It's ironclad. We have no standing. We are, for all intents and purposes, trespassing." The room erupted. Board members were talking at once, a cacophony of panic and anger directed squarely at the boy, wonder who had just driven the company off a cliff. David Miller raised his voice, just enough to be heard over the din. "Gentlemen, my client is a reasonable man. He is not interested in destroying this company. He is, however, interested in a just and equitable solution." He let the board members quiet down. "Mr. Patterson is prepared to offer you a new lease," David announced. "A 20-year term at the current fair market rate for this location. That comes to approximately $4.2 million per year, triple net, payable in advance." A gasp went around the table. The old lease had been a rounding error in their budget. This was a massive, crippling expense. "Alternatively," David continued smoothly, "Mr. Patterson is willing to sell you the land. His asking price is its current assessed value, which the city has pegged at $98 million. More panicked murmurs. Bryce looked like he was going to be physically ill. "There is," David said, letting a dramatic pause hang in the air, "a third option." All eyes turned to me. I hadn't moved. I was just standing there, a ghost from the basement, come to haunt the boardroom. "Mr. Patterson," David said, "possesses a certain institutional knowledge that appears to be sorely lacking in current management. He believes in this company's potential, but not under its current leadership." He looked directly at Arthur Thompson. "My client will agree to a 99-year lease at a significantly reduced rate of $1 million per year. In exchange, he requires a controlling interest in Sterling West Financial, awarded via a new class of shares, amounting to 51% of voting rights. He will assume the position of chairman of the board, effective immediately, and his first act as chairman will be to accept the resignation of Mr. Bryce Thompson and the entire executive team he appointed. It was a checkmate delivered with surgical precision. They could face financial ruin, or they could hand over the keys. Arthur Thompson stared at me for a long moment. I saw not anger, but a cold, pragmatic calculation in his eyes. He was a builder, like old man Sterling. He understood leverage. He looked at his son, whose career had just evaporated in a puff of corporate jargon, and then back at me. "I move for a vote," Arthur said, his voice like stones grinding together, "to accept the third option." It was unanimous. Bryce was fired on the spot. He was escorted from the building by the same security guards he had tried to call on me. He didn't get a severance package. His stock options were voided due to termination for cause, for gross negligence that had cost the company its own headquarters. The Brioni suit seemed to hang off him as he walked out, a hollowed-out man. The aftermath was swift and decisive. As chairman, my first order of business was to terminate the contract with Synergy Serve. My second was to call George. "George," I said, "I need you to get the old crew back together. I'm making you director of facilities. Your salary is doubled, and your first priority is to get the power back on in Building 1. He was silent for a moment. "Don, is that you? What the hell is going on?" "I'll explain later," I said. "For now, let's just say there's been a change in management." Within 4 hours, George and 2 other veterans I rehired had bypassed the fried relay and restored power to the main building. They knew exactly what to do. The expensive gala was canceled, costing the company nearly $2 million in non-refundable deposits, a final monument to Bryce's hubris. The HR director who had sat silently during my firing was part of the executive team I let go. She was offered a standard severance. I didn't take over as CEO. I was too smart for that. I hired a competent, experienced operations executive, a woman in her late 40s who had a reputation for being tough but fair. I didn't want to run the day-to-day. I wanted to be the guardian, the steward. The board members who had once seen me as invisible, furniture now treated me with a comical level of deference. I was no longer Don, the fix-it man. I was Mr. Patterson, the chairman, the man who owned the ground beneath their feet. The poetic justice was rich. Bryce, I heard, ended up moving back in with his parents. His Tesla was repossessed. The last I heard, he was trying to launch a startup, some app that promised to disrupt the artisanal coffee space. I, on the other hand, finally had time. I set up a trust for Mark and my granddaughter, Emily. Their futures were secure beyond my wildest dreams. I spent my afternoons with Emily, pushing her on the swings at the park, something I'd missed with my own son. I finally pulled the dusty cover off the 1968 Ford Mustang in my garage, Clara's old car, and began the restoration project I had put off for 3 decades. My hands, which had spent so long fixing things for other people, were now fixing something for myself. Sometimes I drive down to the campus on a Saturday. I don't go inside. I just park across the street and look at it. The handsome old building from 1925, flanked by its newer, shinier children. It all looks the same. Solid. Permanent. But I know the truth. I know that the real power isn't in the glass towers or the fancy boardrooms. It's in the foundation. They teach you about assets in business school. Stocks, bonds, capital equipment. They show you balance sheets and P&L statements. But they never teach you that the most valuable asset can be the quiet man who knows where all the shutoff valves are. Value doesn't always show up on a spreadsheet. Sometimes you don't see it at all until it's gone. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you spending your time here. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. I'll see you in the next video.